Welcome back to week number 3 for GRA-152 Computer Graphics 2, aka your introduction into Adobe Photoshop. This week we're going to go into the sandwich layering assignment where we're going to learn kind of 3 big key aspects as a Photoshop user, right? You're going to learn about selection tools, how to make selections from photos. You're going to learn about layer masking, aka how to mask, so hiding or revealing sections or selections from photos. And then finally, you're going to learn kind of about layer management, arranging of layers in your Photoshop document. First thing you want to do, right, if you scroll down in Moodle, you're going to see this zip file. It's going to be your sandwich layering assignment resource files zip that we need to download. So if you click on it, it'll open up. You can save it to your downloads. It'll download as a zip file, which means that, of course, we click on it, it'll unzip, right? And so we will have a folder with all of our resource files that we're going to use for this project. You can see all the images that have been placed in that folder. So bacon, lettuce, plate, slice of bread, tomato, and of course I've got a written version of this tutorial as well if you want to use it. If you don't require kind of using a video, you can try to use this as well. Just kind of an extra resource, whichever works for you. It's the same process, just with no visuals, no screen captures. So let's jump into it. First things first, right? We want to make sure we open Photoshop. So we're going to open Photoshop. We are going to open, right, the plate file. So if I go to open here or do file open, which can also be done by doing Command O, we can open the plate.jpg file, which is going to be our kind of canvas, right? Our bare bones, our kind of base level that we're going to stack everything on top of. As we have our plate file, before we do anything else, I think that it's always good practice as you start a new project to reset your tools, right? So from the past 2 assignments we've done, you've used different type tools, you've used different brush tools, you've used different tools. And so I think it's always good to just kind of reset from scratch. And so the easiest way of doing that, no matter what tool you use, if you go up here on your options bar, if you click on the tool drop down, so you see for right now I've got the brush clicked on. If I do my drop down for my brush, there's a little gear icon, and for that gear icon we can see all the tool information, so we can reset all tools, and basically it's just going to reset all tools to their default settings. Again, I think that's really helpful just to get into the habit of, if you changed the color of your previous brushes or type or whatever, right now I've got red and white. If I hit D on my keyboard, that'll reset the colors to black and white, which we are going to need to use later down the road in this tutorial. So we've got our plate file open. That's awesome. Next step is we want to make sure we rename that background layer of our plate file. So we're going to double click on where it says background, and we're going to rename it as plate. Basically, the big thing we want to take away from Photoshop is that we're naming our layers so that we again know which layers we're dealing with. We're only dealing with like a handful for this project, but as you learn Photoshop, as you get into bigger projects, you're going to be using a lot of layers. And it's really, really good habit to try to make sure that you rename your layers so that you know what you're looking at as you click on each one. So next thing, right, we want to open our slice of bread. So let's go ahead and do File, Open. Again, you can do Command O. Either way is acceptable. We're going to do Slice of Bread. And so notice that again, kind of we talked about previously last week, as we open multiple files in Photoshop, it's kind of like an internet browser, right? So it opens in tabs. Our next step here is that we want to move this bread onto the plate image. So we're going to grab our Move tool, we're going to click, and we're going to drag that bread and drop it on top of the plate. Notice that I have dragged, aka I'm clicking my mouse. I have not let it go yet. I will drop it by letting go of the mouse once I'm over my plate. So I drop it, boom, awesome. We want to make this look as realistic as possible, so all of the images we use, we're going to want to remove the backgrounds from these images, okay? So first things first, to be able to remove backgrounds, we need to understand how to select parts of a picture, right? So for this bread layer, before I do anything else, remember I said best practice is to make sure that we rename it. So this is bread. A sandwich is made up of 2 pieces of bread, so we're going to start with the bottom bread. So I'm going to do bread dash bottom. That way we know it's the bottom layer, okay? I'm going to zoom in because I think it's best practice also to make sure that you're zoomed in while you're working, not so far zoomed out. So Command plus until you can see the whole image around. Notice that we're zoomed in, so if I need to move around my image, right, if I need to kind of look around and zoom around, I can use these sliders, right, and move around my image, or if I want, right, I can hold the space bar. Notice the space bar turns my mouse icon into a hand, which basically lets us pan around an image, which panning just lets us basically imagine you're moving the picture. You're really close up. You're moving the picture around so you can kind of see what it looks like and see the view. So I'm going to set it up from there. So with the bread, right, we can do different types of selection tools. I'm going to talk about a couple different ones. All the selection tools, if we look, are within these 3 tools right here. All tools in Photoshop and Illustrator, right, if they ever have that little triangle icon in the bottom right hand corner, that means there's multiple tools within that one single button. So if I right click on a tool, I can see all the different types of tools that exist in there. So for this project, we're probably not going to use any of the marquee tools, but I'm going to talk about it. So these marquee tools, right? The marquee tools let you do generic, simple shapes. So you can make a generic rectangular marquee selection or a generic elliptical marquee selection or a single row or a single column. All that means is that if we wanted to do a straight up rectangle or square-like selection, I could click and drag a selection of literally just a rectangle or a square or an ellipse or a column, right? It's literally just a basic shape. For this and for this project, we're not going to be using any of the marquee selections, but they possibly hold a good use if you have a literal square image. So a selection, right? In Photoshop, anytime you make a selection, you see these little moving lines, which are also referred to as dancing ants. That is literally a Adobe specified term, right? Dancing ants, which means that you have made a selection. You're selecting a portion of this picture. And so I don't want this selection, so I'm going to look down on my keyboard and I can do Command D to deselect, or if we were to look up at the menu at the very top of the Photoshop screen, we can see select and we can see deselect. Command D is just a shortcut on your keyboard. Get used to shortcuts on your keyboard. I think they're really helpful in your flow as a designer, but again, select, deselect. So we're going to deselect, dancing ants go away. We don't want them. Cool. So marquee tools, probably not going to be used for this. Let's look at the next ones, right? We've got lasso, we've got polygonal lasso, we've got magnetic lasso. For a lasso tool, if I were to click it, right, I could drag and draw with my mouse a selection freeform. That's great and all if you're really, really steady with your mouse, right? Some people are, some people aren't. I don't think that it's the best tool, so I'm going to Control or Command D, depending on which PC or Mac you're using, to deselect. The polygonal lasso lets you kind of do similar things, like if you recall back from using your pen tool to make polygonal shapes, right? You can click and let go, and make a polygonal selection, right? So you're basically clicking and letting go of your mouse to make a selection around a shape, which is, again, actually better than just doing the straight up lasso tool. The problem, if we were to ultimately do this, right, if we were to go around the entire shape and all that jazz, the problem ultimately is going to be that although you can take the time to select things, and there are definitely shapes that should probably be done using the magnetic lasso or the polygonal lasso, it is ultimately going to give you polygonal effects, aka it's going to give you those sharp jagged edges around your selection. Okay, I'm going to Command D to deselect again. The magnetic lasso, I will typically never recommend because it lets the computer kind of do the work for you, and the computer is not as smart as you think it is, right? The magnetic lasso tool, if I click and let go of my mouse, notice that as I let go of my mouse and I'm just following my mouse around the shape of the bread, it basically acts as a magnet and tries to recognize the edge of this bread. Now that's cool and all, and might work, at least up here where there's just a white background and the bread piece. But once I get down to where there's shadows and where there's, you know, different levels of color in the background, it doesn't catch everything that we want it to, right? So I could go around and I can try to do this, and it'll get it kind of, sort of, pretty well, right? As I go to the edge and I close it at the beginning shape, notice that it does a pretty decent job at the top, but around the edges down here with the shadow, it kind of misses bits and pieces where the kind of gray and outline of that is. So Command D. On the third tool right here, right, we've got object selection, we've got quick selection, we've got magic wand. The object selection tool is a pretty new tool in Photoshop, right? So basically, if we were to click and drag this rectangle of the object selection over our piece of bread, we can try to get it as tight as possible while giving it the space it needs. And once I let go, Photoshop will try to basically figure out the edge of that object, right? It's going to try to figure out where the edge of that object is and where the background is. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. So notice that for this piece of bread, because of the least complexity with the background, the object selection actually did a pretty decent job. Okay, so you could use that as a selection tool. Let's continue. Command D to deselect. I'm going to use the quick selection tool. So notice the quick selection tool looks like a paintbrush. And so it'll look very similar to like a paintbrush, right? You have a paintbrush right here. Basically, you're selecting the bread or selecting the item that you want to use. So as I go and try to paint around it, notice it does a decent job, but it doesn't recognize the edge of the shadow. And then finally, we of course have the magic wand tool, right? So the magic wand tool is basically a magical piece of tool. Basically, if I click on a selection, it's going to recognize within this photo of this bread everything that is of that individual color. So notice if I click on the white of the background, notice it selects the white of the background, right? It doesn't select this gray. It recognizes that gray is a different color value. It doesn't grab the bread. But if I click on the inside of the bread, right, which is of course made up of a lot of different colors, right, it's going to try to find the value of the pixel that I click on. AKA, it's going to select a lot of little points, but it's going to miss a lot of stuff. So basically, the magic wand is really good at selecting individual colors. So if you have just a solid white background for a picture, it might possibly work really well. Notice that all of the tools I've pretty much said work pretty well. They have their downsides. All tools inevitably have their downsides, right? The polygonal lasso tool, fantastic tool. It just takes time and patience, right? It means that you have to click and make all of your points around a shape that you're trying to select. Magic wand, great if it's one single color, but it literally does one color and that's it, right? The quick selection tool, pretty decent, but it gives a lot of control over the computer, kind of like the magnetic lasso. So the computer can try to think about what's actually around the bread, but it's not going to recognize everything kind of what's around it. The object selection is like the closest to AI being really, really, really smart. So my recommendation is find the tool that fits best for your object, but also find the one that makes the most sense. For me, for this bread piece, I'm going to do the object selection tool just to see if I can get it right around where it needs to be for the bread. So notice again, the box that I drag for the object selection tool is as close as possible to the bread. Notice I'm cutting into the shadow and I'm not dragging it outside of the shadow. So it does a pretty decent job, right? And so what we're going to look at next, so I've got my selection made, dancing ants are here, is I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my toolbar. If you look for a sec, there is a little icon that looks like a rectangle with a circle. It's called our quick mask mode. Okay, so not layer mask, but our quick mask mode. Again, it's quick mask Q. And so if I either click that button or if I click the Q key on my keyboard, I'll go into this mode. So in quick mask mode, we can see a selection we've made. We can see what would be hidden if we are going to use a layer mask and what would be revealed. So in quick mask mode, when this button is pressed down, we see that anything that would be hidden when we do a layer mask is going to be kind of represented in this pink tint, right? So basically everything around the bread is going to be hidden. Anything that is going to show through will show through the original picture. So notice the bread shows through fantastically, okay? So for the bread, this works perfectly. I'm going to exit quick mask mode by clicking it again. I also can exit quick mask mode by hitting Q. Notice the shortcut is just Q to enter or to exit the mode. I have to exit the mode before I do anything else, okay? Number one step, I have to exit the mode before I do anything else. So I'm exited out of the mode. Notice I only have my dancing ants. I do not have my quick mask button clicked down. So on this bread layer, I'm going to click on the layer mask button. If you look on your layers panel, you'll see this little button. It looks kind of similar, right? A rectangle with a circle. That is our layer mask button. So you probably are thinking, why can't I just hit backspace and delete this, right? And if we hit backspace and just delete stuff that we don't want, we're permanently deleting that picture. We're permanently altering that picture, which means we can't come back later on down the road to fix it. A layer mask, if we click it, just hides the background, right? So if we made a mistake, notice that the little box to the right of it that popped out, right here, this is our layer mask preview of what we have masked. It's our thumbnail that shows exactly what we've masked from this image. If I want to go back and edit something, I can click on that layer mask. I can use my paintbrush, right? And this is the reason why we hit D at the very beginning of the tutorial to do white and black, right? On the layer mask icon, if we click on it and look, with the paintbrush selected, white reveals and black hides. To make my brush bigger, I'm going to make it bigger by either going up here clicking on this little menu right here for my paintbrush, clicking and dragging hardness all the way to 100%. I want a hard brush, not a soft brush. And then I can either slide this up a little bit to make my brush bigger. Notice it's bigger now. The shortcut on your keyboard, because there's always a shortcut for everything, is the left bracket. If you look underneath of your minus key, the left bracket key makes your brush smaller. And then if you look underneath of your plus key, the right bracket makes your brush bigger. So I said that white, if we look, when we're clicked on our layer mask, will reveal whatever I paint, right? If I switch these two, so that little arrow right there lets me switch between the foreground and background colors. Notice the shortcut for that is X, so I can flip back and forth by hitting X. So black, if white reveals, black hides, right? So with a black paintbrush, I can hide whatever I want. That means that we can always go back and edit depending on what brush color we have clicked on. If we just deleted this, it'd be gone, right? So I'm going to Control or Command Z to undo to go back to where we had it selected. And so let's look at the next couple of pieces, right? We have the bottom piece of bread. Before we do anything else, we've done a lot of work, which means I want to do File and Save As. I'm going to save on my computer. Notice that I want to keep this as a Photoshop file, so it has been a JPEG. I want to keep this as a Photoshop file. I'm going to do first initial, last name, sandwich. .psd, save it to where you want to save it to. So right now it's trying to go to the resource files. If I want to click on my downloads, I can save it there. And then I'm going to make sure that format is set to Photoshop. Again, just like most things we've been doing in Photoshop, we're okay with clicking OK for this menu for maximizing compatibility. So we're going to keep this as a Photoshop document. Right? The next thing that we want to do is basically I want to remove the background from each of the pieces of the sandwich, right? We don't need this slice of bread open anymore, so we're going to close it because it's already in this file. If I zoom out, we can see this bread on our plate. So let's go to the next one, right? The next part of the sandwich that we're going to deal with is we're going to open the lettuce file. So we're going to do File, Open, and we're going to look at this lettuce piece. So sandwich layers, resources, lettuce, and open. As we look at this, we're going to click and move with our move tool, just like we did with our bread, and move it over. Notice it is bigger than the bread file, so we need to transform this down because that's a massive piece of lettuce. So if you look, you can do this by doing Command T to transform. Command T will let you size this down and get it to be actually like the size that you want a piece of lettuce on your bread. Okay. We'll go with about that size. Just again, the same deal, right? We want to make sure to remove the background so that it looks like it's real, so it's sitting on top of the spread. So I'm going to zoom in, Command plus, and then I want to look at this lettuce, right? So let's try to see if the object selection tool works. I'm going to do Command S to save. Get into the habit of doing Command S all the time. Command S is our shortcut for just making sure that you're saving. If you've saved recently, this will be grayed out. Not save as copy, but save. Just Command S anytime you do something big. Okay. So with the object selection tool, I'm going to try to click and drag around my lettuce, get it as close as possible. I want to make sure that all of the picture is in it, right? So notice that I have all of the lettuce within it. I'm going to click, I'm going to let go. I'm going to see how well Photoshop recognizes the edges of this lettuce, okay? So we're going to zoom in, look at kind of how the dancing ants are treating. So if we look, notice it misses a little bit, but it does a really good job with recognizing a lot of the edges. It does miss little tiny pieces, right? You can see it grabs most of it, so I'm pleased with this. So let's look for a second. So I'm going to go again into quick mask mode, right? At the very bottom of your tool panel, we're going to click on that. Again, you could hit Q or you can hit the button. And so again, anything that's pink in quick mask mode is what would be hidden. Anything that's revealed is going to show up when we do a layer mask. So I'm going to zoom in with Command plus, and I'm going to get close in because of the fact that some of the pieces it misses, right, are small. Right, so if we were to look up here, I believe it's at this top right corner. There we go. It misses this bit, and this bit. And so what we're going to do, since we're in quick mask mode, we're going to tidy up our selection. We're going to make that selection refined. We're going to help make it look better. And so I'm going to grab my paintbrush. This is the same process of doing basically what we did with our layer mask after the fact. This is just before we actually layer mask anything. So with my brush tool selected, notice it's a big brush. I need it to be tinier. I'm going to hit my left bracket to make the brush smaller. Told you smaller, so here we are, right? So black hides, white reveals, right? So right now we're on black. So to be able to hide this, to be able to hide it just like the background, we're going to paint and paint away anything that's not the lettuce. Because of how small this is, I'm going to do Command plus even further. I'm going to use my space bar to be able to pan over, click and pan over. So I'm holding space bar and then I'm clicking and dragging my mouse so that I can see where it's going to be. I'm going to let go of my space bar. Notice it jumps back to the brush tool, and then I can go in here and paint what I don't want to be showing through, right? Now notice that that's just a tear in the lettuce. That's the reason why it's revealing white, right? If I hold spacebar and pan up here, this one just didn't get caught when we did our object selection, just because it was such a small entrance right here. But we're going to do the same thing. We're going to paint it away so that it does not show up in our final mask. So notice that this is a bigger area. This is a smaller area, so I'm going to make it smaller as a paintbrush so I can get into that little crevice in that little area. Okay. If you ever have edges around the edge of a photo where it feels like it's going to give a halo effect, you can always do the same thing. You can basically go with a black paintbrush and just paint it away so that it doesn't give you that kind of halo effect here, right? This is really, really important that we make sure that, again, our hardness is always set to 100% whenever we're trying to make a selection and hide or mask out a background. So let's go pan over here. There we go. And there is the other big area. So I'm going to start with a small brush, kind of paint upwards, make my brush bigger, and then go around. So let's say that you did this. You accidentally painted over the edge of your lettuce, right? Obviously, you want that lettuce to be showing. And so, again, because it's not hitting backspace, you're not hitting delete, you're not permanently changing something of this photo, all I have to do is swap the foreground and background color by either clicking this arrow or clicking X on my keyboard, change it to a white paintbrush, and paint it back. right? So you can always go back and forth. If you ever accidentally make a mistake and you go over the edge of something, switch it to a white paintbrush and paint it so it comes back. Same deal if you accidentally paint off the background. I believe, other than small little areas that maybe I want to like kind of touch up on, right? This should be the vast majority of what I want to get. Oh, there's a little bit more. So there's little pockets, and almost guaranteed, no matter what type of photo you use, you're almost always inevitably going to run into having some type of area that you're going to need to paint away. Now, the beautiful thing about this, right, is let me zoom out for a sec. I believe that I got most of it. I'm going to leave this little bit here just so you can see it for a split sec. I'm going to exit out of quick mask mode. So remember, anytime that we go in quick mask mode, we always have to exit it before we do anything else. So click the quick mask button or hit Q. So I've got my selection. I cleaned up my selection. Notice now the dancing ants are going into those little crevices of the lettuce. And now I can go over here to my layer mask and add a layer mask, right? So notice the background gets removed. We have a nice crisp piece of lettuce, all pun intended. So let me zoom in for a sec. So I can go and I can look at my lettuce. I can see how it looks. If there's any type of halo effect or if there's any type of piece that I just like, I want to clean up, right? It's the same deal as going into quick mask mode. I can always edit it after the fact by going here and clicking on my layer mask and using my paintbrush. Remember, black hides, white reveals, right? So with my paintbrush, so long as I go, I make my brush bigger by hitting the right bracket. If I want to hide something, I can always hide it, right? If I want to reveal it, flip the black to white by hitting X or that arrow, and I can reveal what I want to reveal, okay? So this is true for every image you ever edit. You can always go back with this non-destructive method. That's what we usually call anything that's not permanently changing or altering a photo. So remember, the filters last week were a permanent destructive form of editing. When we make selections and we use layer masking to hide a background, we are non-destructively editing a photo. We are not just hitting backspace or hitting delete and getting rid of a part of a picture permanently, which means you always want to have these layer masks here on your layers. I need to double click and change this lettuce layer to lettuce, right? I'm going to do, of course, Command S to save my work because I just did a lot of work by removing the background from the lettuce. So this gets you off to a good start, right? The same type of techniques are used for the tomato, the same techniques are used for the bacon, same techniques are used for any other thing you want to add to your sandwich, including cheese, or if you want to add like a little side dish on your dish, like pickles or chips, or if you want to add, for instance, a soda or a beverage on the side, same deal, right? Anytime that we bring in an image, that same process we just did. Next, right, we're going to do file open, and I'm going to do a little bit different. So we're going to do tomato. I'm going to look at this tomato for a sec. I'm going to drag it over using my move tool, drop it. Notice that's a giant piece of tomato. I don't think tomatoes are that big, so we're going to do Command T to transform. We're going to get it a little bit more realistic, right? So let's go with about this size. And I'm going to hit enter to finalize moving it, right? So same deal. I want to make sure I name this. So double click on the layer, tomato. I'm going to zoom in so I can see my tomato. That's a little too far in, so I'm going to zoom out one more step. All right, so with this tomato, right, instead of using the object selection tool, I'm going to use the magic wand. Primarily because with the lettuce and the bread, there were parts of the lettuce and there were parts of the bread that were semi-close to being white that it might have messed up and selected part of the lettuce if I tried to use the magic wand. But for this tomato, let's use the magic wand and see what happens. So again, the magic wand selects a single color range, right? So if I click on the background of white here, notice it gets it pretty close, kind of like the object selection did. Right? So let's go into quick mask for a second. I want you to see what's going to happen when I go into the quick mask mode. So notice that the quick mask mode has obviously outside of the picture pink because that's not actually part of the picture, but it has the tomato pink, right? So in quick mask mode, red/pink indicates that that's what's going to be hidden, right? So if I exited quick mask mode right now and I tried to go mask out this picture, it would remove the piece of the tomato. I'm going to Command Z to undo it so you can see this. So if this is the case, right, when I'm out of quick mask mode and I've got this selection, if I go into quick mask mode and I notice, wow, my item is pink. Why is my item pink, right? If I exit out of quick mask mode, all that means is I need to do up to select and inverse. So basically I need to inverse my selection. So instead of the tomato being pink, I need to inverse my selection so that when I go into quick mask, the edge of the tomato, everything outside of the tomato is going to be hidden. Notice this ring around the tomato, right? And so you could do the same thing that we talked about with the lettuce, right? You're going to use your paintbrush. You can clean up the edge of the tomato. So again, this is where it's going to come into handy of making sure that you're on the black paint and you can go around and paint the edge of the tomato to clean it up. This is also something that if you had a perfect circle, like we kind of sort of have-ish with a tomato, right? If I wanted to, I could always use other tools such as if I wanted to use the elliptical marquee tool. This tomato is not perfectly circular, so I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to go back into quick mask. I'm going to kind of go back and just go back into hiding this background. So I'm going to tidy up my selection again by just going around the edge. It's okay that it's going off the edge here. Again, anything that is going to be hidden from this picture will be pink. So on this layer, it doesn't matter that it goes over the edge. The big thing is that the tomato itself is obviously not painted over, right? So if you accidentally go over it, you can see that little shade difference right there. Remember again, swap to white and just paint it back so it's revealed, right? But remember, black hides, white reveals. If I can drill that into your brain throughout this project, that's the big thing for making any type of selection in Photoshop is that while we're trying to make a mask, right, black will always hide in Photoshop, especially when we're dealing with masks, and white will always reveal. So we're going to tidy this up. Again, we could also do this after the fact, after we do a layer mask, right? So if I wanted, I could get it to this point. I could exit quick mask, right? We can see our dancing ants and that selection a little bit better there. And then if we want, we can go layer mask it. And if we have bits and pieces, so for instance, the edge down here, we can always go with our paintbrush and then proceed to do the same thing. The big thing is that we want to make sure, again, we're always clicked on this right here, our layer mask. If we ever clicked on our picture, you'll notice that little box transfers over here instead. If we ever do that, the problem that we're going to run into is that we will inevitably be painting on our photo, which we don't want to do, right? We don't want to paint on our photo. We're painting on the layer mask to hide or reveal parts of the picture. So always make sure that your layer mask is selected and not the photo itself. So I'm going to go tidy this picture up for this tomato. Now, how long you spend on trying to tidy a photo, right, is how realistic it winds up looking, okay? So with this piece of tomato, I would say the vast majority of tomatoes we encounter probably not always like perfectly round. So I'm probably okay with getting away with kind of having little bit of, you know, off shape kind of taking away. The big thing is I don't want chunks of it taken away, right? And I don't want it to be like angular. So just make sure that you get it as close as possible. If you don't like the way something looks, Command Z to undo it. Remember, Command Z is your best friend. It's okay. So the reason I made this tomato small, okay, I'm going to click back onto the photo now. I'm going to use my move tool, is that I want to make copies of this tomato, right? I think that a tomato sandwich or a BLT, if we had tomatoes, probably would have more than one tomato. And so we can do this by a couple things. We can either right-click on this menu. We could do duplicate layer, right? If we did that, it's going to make a duplicate layer. It's asking us what to call it, so let's call it tomato 2. Right? Notice that's a new layer. It's the exact same thing. It's on top of each other, so I'm going to move tomato 2 to be above tomato 1. Right? If I also want to shortcut, instead of right-clicking on a menu and all that, if you look down at your keyboard, you can use Alt. And notice that my mouse icon turns into 2 arrows, which of course will let us click and drag a copy. As long as I hold down Alt, that will let me drag out a copy. However, notice as I drag out both of those copies, it just makes copy 2, copy 2, 2. And so we will need to, of course, change that to be tomato 3 and tomato 4. Okay, we're going to have a lot of tomatoes. So that's awesome. We're going to close that tomato. We're going to Command S to save because we just did a bunch of work, right? And next, we're going to do File, Open. We're going to open our bacon layer. So as we open our bacon, we're going to click and drag it just like we have been for every other piece. Notice, again, big picture, so I'm going to zoom out for a sec. Command T to transform my bacon. I'm going to get it realistically, so that bacon probably, for that amount, will probably be about like there, maybe a little bit bigger. Right about there. I'm going to hit Enter to finalize, and we're going to zoom in so we can see this bacon in all of its glory. All right, so the bacon is pretty dark colored, so I think that if we probably use the magic wand, we probably could get the edges pretty well selected. Let's look at quick mask. Notice again, because of the way that the quick mask works, and because I'm selecting the outside, that means that I'm selecting the outside, not the bacon, which means inevitably, if the bacon is pink and the outside is not, that means I need to exit quick mask, and I need to do select and inverse to inverse my selection. Okay. If I now look at quick mask, the background around the bacon is pink. I'm going to exit quick mask. I'm going to talk about one more thing kind of with the previous tool we've kind of briefly touched on. Command D to deselect. So if I go with my quick selection tool, right, let's act like it's a brush. So just like because it is a brush, I can do my right bracket to make it a bigger brush. That means that if I wanted to, I could go inside of my bacon, right? I could paint within inside of my bacon and try to do the same thing and try to see how well of a selection it would make if I try to go to the edge. Notice I'm staying within. I'm not going with my mouse outside of my bacon. I'll go to the edge, but I won't go on the outside. It misses it. So again, depending on the item you choose, so not just for this sandwich, but for like anything you try to Photoshop, the quick selection tool can be useful. It just might mean that inevitably when you go and you select something, you might have to tidy it up in quick mask mode. That's true for almost every single selection tool we come across. Inevitably, you can try to use any of these tools and they all will work, right? The big thing to understand is that Photoshop's a software program, and it's inevitably not always going to be perfect, right? So the magic wand does a pretty decent job for this bacon if I select the outside, but I still have to, if you think about it, make a small change by flipping or inversing my selection by going up to select inverse, and then it's pretty perfect, right? Most of the edges get caught and are caught pretty well. This bacon's perfect there. I don't see any overlap. I don't see any awkward spots. That might possibly come up, but we'll see in just a second. So I'm going to zoom out. Just understand that with any selection tools, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to be the perfection maker, right? You're going to have to go in and perfect that selection inevitably for whatever image you're trying to select and edit. So I'm going to exit quick mask mode just like we always do. I'm going to go in here and do a layer mask for the bacon. I'm going to go and I'm going to wiggle this bacon for a sec, mainly because we talked about that little dot right there, right? So I'm on my quick mask mode. I'm going to zoom in, hold spacebar to pan in. That little spot is because of that little bit that was on the picture. And so remember again, paintbrush, black hides, white reveals. So long as I'm clicked on that layer mask, I can just hit it once and make it disappear. Everything else was good, right? If you look, that bacon came out looking really great. So I'm going to double click and name it bacon. And then we're going to go to the next step, right? So Command S to save your work. I'm going to close that bacon image because we don't need it anymore. It's on the sandwich. If I wanted to double up my bacon, I could double up my bacon just like I did with the tomatoes. That's completely up to you. Just make sure that you name it appropriately. A bacon 1, bacon 2, bacon 3, onwards, depending on if you're making a baconator. The next thing I want to do is I want to add like a condiment, like mustard, or I want to add ketchup or mayo, whatever, right? So I'm going to do this by creating mustard out of a paint brush stroke. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. This little plus symbol down here at the bottom right hand corner will make a brand new layer. Notice that it's transparent, so it's just a plain blank layer, right? There's nothing on this layer. We see everything below it. We see all of the layers we've done so far, but layer 1 right here is just straight up nothing. So right now, if I were to hide by clicking the eyeball to hide all my other layers, notice there is nothing actually on this layer. Okay, so I'm using a blank layer to paint on, but we can always hide any of these layers by clicking on the eyeballs to reveal anything we want to turn off or hide along the process. So I'm going to double click and call it mustard so I know what it is. I'm going to go back to my brush tool, right? So right now my brush tool has been on black and white. We're going to change that to a yellow color. I can go up here in my color panel. I can change it up here. I can also, if I want to, double click in this area right here. The color picker will pick up. Let's say I want like a honey Dijon kind of colored mustard. I can kind of go with a dark colored mustard right there. Click OK. And so we want to think about, if we're making mustard, well, as it's coming out, what's realistic, right? So as a paintbrush, I probably want it to be about right there. I think that's a decent size for when we squeeze out some mustard. And so I'm going to do some squiggles. If I don't like the way a squiggle looks, Command Z, right? Just undo it. So don't overthink it, but I'm going to make 3 little squiggles. I don't like the way those look. Let's do this. Cool. We got a little smiley face. So obviously this paint layer does not look like mustard, right? It doesn't look realistic. But one of the things I want you to see, right, is that with a layer such as this wonderful piece of, just paint, we can add layer styles to make things look a little bit more realistic, to add some depth to it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add bevel and emboss, right? So as a layer style, bevel and emboss. So this menu will pop up right here, right? Bevel and emboss will pop up, and we can kind of add some more texture to it, some more depth to it. So let's start with outer bevel. Let's increase the depth and kind of look at what this is going to look like. So let's go back to inner bevel. Let's go here to soften. We're going to soften this up a lot just because I think that if it was liquid, right, so the soft edge of it is going to be kind of like pretty soft, right? Hard edge would be right on the edge of like, it would be really, really hard against the edge. So size, go by here, depth. Notice that basically what I'm adjusting, if you kind of look over here in this corner as well as on the actual item, right, it's adding highlights, it's adding shadow and kind of midtones to whatever layer you have clicked on. And so bevel and emboss, it's trying to make it look as if it's 3D, right? We could do emboss, which is going to be the opposite, and bevel, which is going to be outer bevel is going to be on the outside edge of these shapes. Inner bevel is what we want for this kind of, so it's affecting kind of the liquid effect. We can change the shading of it, so angle if we want to change the direction of where it's going. We could also, if we wanted, we could do contour, we could do texture. If we click on texture, you can see, like click on texture itself right here, you can see different patterns. Right now it's on leaves. So depending, again, there might be some that you want or you like for the look and appearance of it. For me, I don't actually like the appearance of any of these textures for this, so I'm going to just go back to bevel and emboss and mess with that. Once I decide how this looks and how it looks good, I'm going to click OK. The other thing we want to think about is bacon sometimes is slightly translucent, slightly see-through just because of the fat that makes up the bacon. And so we're going to click on the bacon layer, and I'm going to look up here for the opacity layer. I'm going to drop this opacity down. You can type it in or you can drop it down. I'm not going to go all the way down. It's not a ghost bacon. It's only slightly transparent. just a little bit, just to make it slightly transparent. So this is great and all, right? We have mustard, we have bacon, we have an effect, a layer style on the mustard. We have, slight transparency. We have all the pieces of our sandwich. You can add more to your sandwich. You could find a piece of you can find like a piece of cheese. You can find, other things you want to maybe add to it, maybe a slice of turkey, whatever the case is, right? Ultimately, the whole purpose of this project is to be able to see how you can make selections, how you can mask out the backgrounds of images, and how you move things around, right? So right now, if you look, we have all of these layers. We talked about this a little bit in our last a couple of assignments, but you can always move things. So if you don't want the bacon at the top, you can click that bacon layer. You can drag it below. Notice the blue line, right? So we can drag it below. We can have the bacon be at the very bottom, right above the bottom piece of bread. And so now if you look, we've got bread, bacon, lettuce, tomato. Okay, all of these are individual components that we can stack on top of each other, getting you into the habit of how you arrange layers. If we want our mustard layer below as well, you can do the same thing, right? Maybe the mustard is going to be on that bottom piece of bread. Doesn't have to be on the top, right? Now, that being said, it's a sandwich, and I would argue that a sandwich needs 2 pieces of bread, right? So if that's the case, we need to clearly duplicate or copy this piece of bread. So I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm not going to do Alt or Option because of the fact that it's below. I'm going to call this bread top. Now, that being said, right now we've got 2 pieces of bread stacked on top of each other and everything else stacked on top of those 2 pieces of bread, which means I need to move my bread top to the very, 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 very top. Again, look for that blue line. That blue line indicates it's actually going to be above everything. If I want to move my top piece of bread slightly off kilter so that it appears as if there is some depth there and there's a second piece of bread below it, I can do that. And then I can zoom out for a sec. Command S, of course, just since I did a lot of work right there. I can see my sandwich on my plate. Again, you can add anything to your sandwich. You can add sides, you can add a drink, you can add beverage. Ultimately, though, the big thing I want you to make sure you do is make sure you do file save often, and make sure that what you're submitting to me for the final project is your PSD or your Photoshop file, and that will be this week's project. So congratulations, y'all. You've made it to week number 3. And let's just continue. If you have questions, make sure you ask during class. Make sure you ask in the email or on Slack. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thank you all.